Welcome to episode 231 of Destination Linux. Now, whether you're brand new to open source or you're a guru of sudo, this is the podcast for you. My name's Noah, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. Joining me are my three co-hosts, Michael, Ryan, and Jill. And we have an exciting episode coming up for you on Destination Linux this week. We're going to talk about where Linux is going on the desktop. I know there are a lot of rumors about the Linux desktop right now. What are they? Is there any merit to them? And what are the retorts, if any? We're going to talk about that. Then we're going to take a look at Google's effort to harden the Linux kernel, plus our tips, tricks, and software picks. All of this is coming up right now on Destination Linux.
In the community feedback this week, we go to the DLN forum at dlnforum.com and found an interesting question from community member The Last Ninja. They say, I have been ProtonMail user for 2 years now, but when the current deal ends, I plan to swap to Tutanota. The main reason being ProtonMail currently does not have an Android app that works without Google Play services, which means no notification, which has caused me real issues in life at critical times. Tutanota has an app on F-Droid, but will not be able to use it in the Thunderbird, so that's kind of annoying. But it does have a Linux desktop app. So anyone with experience thoughts on Tutanota, what are your thoughts when you're using this service?
So what do you guys use? For me, it's ProtonMail and Tutanota. I use both.
I'm ProtonMail only.
Yeah, I pay for ProtonMail service. With Tutanota, I use the free account. I have a Tutanota account because so many people were telling me you've got to check it out and utilize it. And it's okay. And I think for certain applications and use cases, it's fine. I just personally trust a lot. I have a lot of trust with ProtonMail because I've been with them for so long, and I just like the way their services work. I like the look of it. I like the inherent security and privacy that they have included within them. That's not to say Tutanota is not a option. In my opinion, it's not a bad option for people either. It's much better than Google services. It's much better than using Gmail or anything like that. And I say either one that you're going to go with, you're going to have a better time. But for me, ProtonMail, I would rather log in through the web interface and use that as my primary.
I'm the same way. The thing is, first of all, Andy is exceptionally open with the direction that the company is going, where their values are, and how they plan to serve those values with their product. And so what I would tell you is I would start there and then work your way backwards. So for example, if there's an issue with it not being on F-Droid, maybe reach out to ProtonMail and say, hey, would you put this on F-Droid? That exact situation came out with Element, right? They had published to F-Droid, and when the Google Play services removed Element from the App Store, they came out on Twitter and said, hey, we're out of the Google Play Store, but we're still on F-Droid. And so that was a way that, because the community had reached out and said, hey, could you please push your product here? And they said, yeah, we're absolutely willing to do that. It gave them some built-in redundancy when Google failed them. So I would suggest let's try to fix those problems if we see them. And then if you can't fix them, then maybe move on to a different service provider. But anytime I go with a service provider, I'm always looking for somebody that has an established track history of doing the things that they say they're going to do. And I think ProtonMail has that in spades. So be my recommendation. But Michael, do you use either?
Yeah, I've used ProtonMail, I've used Tutanota, and I also have an account on my own, like self-hosted thing, which masochism, don't do that. This is just a thing that I've already set up for a long time ago. And I like to, mix it into play different desktop and clients and try out different things. So I've used Thunderbird, I've used Mailspring, and all these things. And I do think that ProtonMail is a good service. I'm not really sure exactly what the Google Play services problem with the notifications aspect is for the ProtonMail thing.
Well, he's saying if you don't have Google Play services, then you can't get the app. If you don't have the app, then you don't get push notifications.
Oh, I see. I got you. So because they're using only F-Droid, okay, that makes sense. So that would be great if there was F-Droid options for those users. And apparently, Tutanota has that. And I do think that Tutanota would be a good option. I don't have any issues with their services. I think they have a good service in general. So I think that Tutanota is great. ProtonMail is great. And for me, I can use kind of any email. It doesn't really matter. So
as long as you're not using Gmail. Jill, what are you using? Don't say Gmail.
Well, I do have a Gmail, but that's not my main account.
Well, we all have one for spam. I'm talking about your regular account. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've actually been using Tutanota because it's got a really nice clean interface on Linux, and it has an app image, which is really, really nice. And speaking of which, we interviewed Hannah Basakoff, press officer at Tutanota, on Destination Linux
Absolutely.
episode 201 back in November. So go take a watch of that episode. And I also like Thunderbird too. So that's kind of my go-to. And then I bring everything into Thunderbird.
But if you like, for this person, they've been using ProtonMail for 2 years, and if they like it, I really like Noah's suggestion here. You should really get involved in the community and ask them and reach out to them nicely to ask to see if they would go out on F-Droid, and then see how many people are interested in it and see if they would port there, because this is a group of people who are definitely willing to make their services available for Linux users and other distros and things like that. For instance, their bridge technology, they use Proton VPN working, of course, on Linux. They've created a lot of things in the open source community. So I think if you reach out to them, you request it, they know it's something people want, they'll probably go out there and add it. But if Tutanota is the alternative that you want to try out, give it a try and see what you think. They're two very different worlds, in my opinion. When you log into one or the other, they look very different. And depending on your personal preferences, one might be more appealing to you than the other.
So we'd invite you to check out the episode that we did with the interview with Tutanota. Also, I'll give a shameless self-promotion for Ask Noah episode 124, where I had Dr. Andy Yen on it, and he introduced us to ProtonMail, what its features are, what they represent, what their values are, and also episode 188, where Dr. Andy Yen joined me to talk about their privacy and security enhancements and how they're dealing with some oppressive countries and helping people get around the roadblocks that are being put up by government, so to speak. And so, but whatever you go with, we want to hear about it. In fact, whatever you're experiencing, what your problems are, what your solutions are, we want to hear all of those, because we love hearing from our community, which, by the way, extends all the way around the world. And so what we want you to do is get your official DLN mug, fill it with some coffee or bubbly, sit down at your nearest stool and send us an email to comments@destinationlinux.org. If you'd like to join the community discussion, then join us on the DLN forum by going to dlnforum.com. This episode of Destination Linux, it's brought to you by DigitalOcean and their new app platform. So as a developer, as a geek, you want to play with toys. And so you come across a new software stack, or you come across a new project that's up on GitHub or GitLab, and you say to yourself, that's the answer to my question. I wanted to have that thing. I need that solution. I want to get it now. How do I do it? Well, before, it would involve something like you'd have to go to Dell, you'd have to buy a server, you'd wait a few weeks for that server to ship. Eventually it would arrive. You'd call 4 or 5 of your buddies over and have them help you get it out of the box because they were heavy. And then you plug it in, and then your wife comes down and asks why a jet engine's running down the basement. You say, it's just going through the boot up sequence. It'll cool down. And then you pray that the fans quiet down later on, and it doesn't actually have to run that loud because it's already been determined now that it doesn't meet the spousal approval factor, right? You can throw all that out the window with DigitalOcean. All you have to do is skip all that steps. Go back to hey, I have that solution. I want to do that. Click on the button, and it takes your code repository and spins it up on a production server in DigitalOcean's data center. Now, DigitalOcean was the first server company to provide all SSDs inside of their servers. They have a 1 gigabit bandwidth limit on each of the servers. So when you spin those servers up, you know that you're going to have access to the internet. You're going to have uninterrupted access to power. You're going to have uninterrupted access to cooling. And then they're going to swap those servers out for you every few years to make sure you're running on the latest and greatest hardware. And as a listener of the DLN community, you can get started for free. Actually, it's better than for free. DigitalOcean is going to give you money to try their services out. You know why they do that? Because, well, a couple of reasons. One, they know that once you try it, you're going to be hooked for life and you're going to become an addict. You're going to be a droplet addict. You won't be able to get off. You'll be like me and you'll have to rerun your budget just to figure out how many DigitalOcean droplets you can buy. If you get past 25 of them, you have to go through a process to ask them, hey, can I please have more droplets? And they'll say yes, but there's a process to do that. And you'll hit that process in no time once you figure out how fantastic they are. They know that's going to happen. And they also want to sponsor this show because they appreciate that the content that we're doing. And so they give us this link. It's do.co/DLN. Close your eyes, memorize it. do.co/DLN. They didn't even put the comma in there. They wanted to make it as short as possible. do.co/DLN. You type that URL into your computer. What that does is it redirects you to their site. You get $100 credit on your DigitalOcean account that you can spin up a $5 droplet or 20 of them, or you can spin up a monster-sized droplet and recover your son's Minecraft world, which I did. I used DigitalOcean's power to do that. But no matter what you use DigitalOcean for, it sends a message to them that you're thankful for the content we produce, you're thankful for the services they provide, and you need access to their world-class data centers. So go to do.co/DLN, get started with that $100 free credit on DigitalOcean's new app platform, and a huge thanks to DigitalOcean for sponsoring this week of Destination Linux.
There are some people out there in the Linux space talking about something that's kind of interesting that we wanted to talk about in the show. So they're putting out the message that Linux on the desktop is on its way out or something like that. And some of their basis for their arguments is interesting. So let's talk about it. We're going to break down a few of them, and we'll go in more details later on. So here's the breakdown, the summary of what they've been saying. So Kernel has become bloated with millions of lines of code being added yearly, making that too difficult to maintain, too many people contributing to the code, making it complex, and security becoming more of an issue because of the complexity of it, that kind of thing. Also talking about how Google is replacing Android with Fuchsia, and other kernels not lasting as long as the Linux kernel. Maybe it's like kind of dated or something. Also saying something like the toxicity impacting adoption or commercial interest that are increasing. How that's we'll talk about that in a second. But community is dying because people couldn't meet and have conferences in person in 2020 and 2021. Like that one, that one's too ridiculous.
That was a little bit of a stretch.
Did actually make me wipe Kubuntu off my laptop and go back to Windows. Now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, that was a interesting perspective.
That sold me.
Also, IBM buying Red Hat and Linux Journal dying, which it actually didn't die, and Microsoft WSL and Google Crostini as other options. And to be clear, this isn't talking about open source software dying or the Linux server dying. Specifically, these claims typically we'd follow by they're just talking about the desktop. So it's interesting, and I wanted to talk about this and like an open discussion method. So will the Linux kernel continue to exist for the desktop, or is it the end is near, or whatever? These people have been.
Let me add one more caveat here that we've got several emails on this topic as these videos and things have gone out. We've gotten several requests on the forums, and we've seen it in discussion as well with people. So we thought, let's tackle it and take a look at it. That's why we're kind of going into it. Otherwise, we would have kind of ignored some of this silliness here. But I think it's important for those who are just joining the community. We have a lot of new people in the community to kind of talk about this because they see this stuff too. And when they see this type of stuff, they may be like, well, geez, I'm not going to spend my time for the next 3 months learning this Linux thing if it's just dying and it's going away. So that's why I think it's really important to kind of touch on the topic. So I guess
very good point.
Where do we want to start in this mess? Jill, kernels become bloated with millions of lines of code being added yearly. Therefore, lots of people contributed to it, and it's awesome. And there's tons of code to it, so therefore it's going to die. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's absolutely ridiculous because, as we all know, there are more lines of code for Microsoft Windows than there are Linux.
Wait a minute. You're telling me that the future, which is, of course, Windows, right?
Yeah.
Has more lines of code than this, and they can maintain it?
How could that be possible?
Impossible.
Well, also, it's funny because when I saw the conversation about the multiple lines, millions of lines of code, and it's like some of that code is maintained by the companies that the hardware is for. Like Intel maintains Intel code inside the Linux kernel. The PlayStation 5 controller code that was added to the Linux kernel support was made by Sony, who makes PlayStation, for those who don't know. And so these things are not issues of having to deal with it on the Linux side because the companies who are wanting the software supported or the hardware supported by the software are doing that work themselves.
Yeah. And also, if the Linux desktop were truly dying, there wouldn't be much development and code being written in the first place.
Oh, no. See, Jill, that's just for the servers. And somehow the server side, because in a lot of this stuff, there's a lot of comments about, we're not talking about Linux on the servers because obviously that's dominating. Well, if the servers are around and existing, the code contributing there, why is the desktop going to go away suddenly?
Yeah.
Where is it going to go?
We have Fedora, which is awesome in Fedora 34, using ButterFS, Wayland, and Pipewire beautifully, and Valve pushing development on Linux. Those technologies wouldn't be progressed if we were truly dying.
That's true.
Okay, Jill, but Google, Google is replacing Android, is the rumor, with Fuchsia. And this could be a big deal because the one platform that I personally can't stand gets represented as a Linux kernel, Android, because of its privacy and security disaster that it is, may go into another microkernel that's being written from the ground up, known as Google Fuchsia, which has exactly one device today that Google Fuchsia runs on, which is the Google Home Hub. is this the disaster? Is this going to take out Linux as we know it because Google launches Fuchsia and moves Android to Fuchsia?
No, they just wanted to control their own kernel for Android.
You're just biased. Noah, tell me here. I mean, Google is going to destroy Linux with Fuchsia, right?
So if I can, I want to take a slightly different approach. I think that mobile is more than likely going to be the thing that offers a threat to any desktop operating system, to include Linux, then Windows or Mac OS. Why? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, when we start looking at the mobile infrastructure, when I say mobile infrastructure, I'm basically referring to Google Android and Apple iOS. What do you get with those two platforms? Why is that so appealing? Well, there is a perceived ease of use, right? Everybody else around you has those devices and they all know how to use them. So when you don't understand how to do something, or when you have a question, you just turn to your immediate left or your immediate right, and one of those people will have the same device that you have. You'll be able to ask your question and likely get the answer. If not, going onto the internet, you're very likely to find the answer on the internet because everybody is talking about the devices, the shared devices and the shared platforms that they're all using.
I mean, that's true for iOS.
Secondly,
that's
there
not
is a
true
lot
for Android.
That is true for Android. My wife came to me the other day. She had an issue she has a Samsung phone. She had an issue with the do not disturb functionality, and it was different on the Samsung phone than it was in stock Android. But just searching her model name and the do not disturb functionality brought up, because there's so many people using that particular model of the S11
with Samsung.
So there is a shared use case there, and that simply doesn't exist with more niche operating systems. There is a lack of responsibility that comes with those mobile devices as well, right? I don't have to think about the software updates. I don't have to think about what software is compatible, incompatible. That's all handled for me by Google or Apple. They negotiate with those people. They deal with the App Store. They pull the bad apps out and they send me the good apps. Again, this is not accurate. This is just the perception, right? They pull all the bad apps out. The apps that are there, those are the ones that are good and work. And I have the rating system so I can tell how the app is going to work ahead of time. By the way, I'm not going to lose any data. I don't have to be responsible for my data anymore, and I don't have to worry about my data loss because all my photos, those get backed up to the cloud. Those are all backed up and they're running there safely for me. All of the things that I do and all of the work that I do, all of that is going to be backed up. And then when I want to upgrade to my next device, all of that data, all of those apps, all of my settings, all of that stuff is going to easily and seamlessly transition over to my new device. So I don't have to think about it. I don't have to become a mini system administrator to use my device. I walked into my cell phone store. I plunked down $1,000. They handed me the device. I took it home. I used it. When I was done with that device, I came back to the same store. I plunked down another $1,000. They handed me another device. I carried on my merry way. That is a very, very appealing way to approach technology for a lot of people. The question that we have to be asking ourselves is, what ultimately is powering all of those mobile devices? How do those pictures wind up automatically back on the device? Well, that's happening thanks to the cloud, or as I call it, someone else's computer. And so as we move towards this model of software as a service and everything running on a server, then we start to look at, well, what has the best software to run a server? What is the most reliable, resilient, secure way to run on a server? And what we found is really we've moved beyond single servers. It's not practical anymore for Google to go put a server in a rack and then say Joe's iPhone connects to that server, right? That's not a reliable, redundant way to run an infrastructure. And so what they've done is they've moved to things like containers and isolating individual processes and then scaling those individual processes out to multiple servers wherever the user is. And that kind of experience can only be delivered by one operating system. And I'll give you 3 guesses. 2 of them aren't Windows and Mac OS. And so you eventually arrive at the fact that most of the innovation that is happening in the technology space, even if it is being consumed by the end user on a mobile device, is actually happening at the server level. When Twitter rolls out a new feature, that's happening on Linux, right?
Then why would something like Chrome OS be far more popular than it is?
Chrome OS would be more popular if the hardware, I think, were better, which Google is trying to kind of shift.
There's a lot of them now that have really ramped that up because I think they thought the same thing you're saying. It's still absolutely not selling.
Yeah, but they're getting closer, right? They've certainly penetrated into the education market, which primarily has been almost exclusively run by Mac computers, and and as they've continued to push out, you see more and more businesses that are saying, hey, I'm going to get on this Google Workspace thing. Why do I want Slack and Teams and all these other things? I just get this Chromebook for $200 or $500 or whatever, sign in, all my stuff is there. So I think we're slowly moving that direction. But what I would encourage us to do, and what I would encourage us to concentrate on, is focusing on values and not on tools. For a long time, I really rejected this idea. People would say, oh, Linux is just the tool or Windows is just the tool. And I always rejected that concept because it's not just a tool. It is a tool, but it is a tool that has tremendous consequence for my life in terms of privacy and security, reliability, and my data integrity.
Well, that's the same reason why I don't accept Android as a true Linux variant, because even though it has some basis for it, it doesn't hold any of the values to what you're saying here that I hold true with privacy and security.
Right. So let's start from that rock and move our way forward. If we focus back down on the values, what are we actually focusing on? Well, in this crowd, we would probably say that we're focusing on privacy, we're focusing on security, we're focusing on stability, we're focusing on reliability, and we're focusing on community. Now, where do you find those 5 or 6 things? Where do you find those core values? You find them in an open source ecosystem and an open source operating system. And so I would tell you, don't let marketing shape your views. Don't let marketing make decisions. You make your decisions based on a 30,000 foot view. Is there any particular reason why my operating system couldn't run something like Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Premiere, whatever the thing is? No, of course not. It's purely a human constraint, a decision on a business not to port that software over to this platform. And so when you look and try to answer the question, is the Linux desktop dying? The question you ask is, are people's values shifting? And if you walked up to 10 people on the street and pulled them aside and sat them down and said, what are your values? Do you care about privacy? Do you want all of your stuff on? Most of those people are going to say, yeah, I do care about privacy. Yeah, I do care about security. Yeah, I very much care about stability. I want reliability. And I like the concept of community. I wasn't aware that I could get those things. I don't know how to get those things. And so the problem isn't so much that Linux is dying and so everybody's moving away. It's a function of people want these things from their technology. They want to.
Well, there's a reason why Apple is spending billions of dollars on campaigns talking about being the privacy and security focused operating system. That it was. The fact is what you said, Noah, wasn't true, in my opinion, just 8 years ago, going out on the street and saying, hey, is privacy and security important to you?
They didn't know.
People didn't know and they didn't seem to care. But today, it's starting to finally shift. It's starting to finally change. And the company, the only one that I really see capitalizing on it, again, whether you believe it or not, is Apple, right? They're marketing it at themselves as that because they realize. If you refer
to my previous bullet point, though, I would highly encourage us not to let marketing shape our view, right? Because to a certain degree, we don't know if Apple actually cares about security or if they've just looked and said, you know, Bill, our metrics show us that people care about this whole privacy thing. And so if we roll these things out, we actually have more control over our ecosystem and we have an excuse to kick those guys out. By the way, it's going to sound really good when we spin it as a privacy thing. What do we do about the FBI? And we have the backups. They're unencrypted and we can hand those over anytime. So as long as the device is encrypted, that's fine. All the data actually comes back to us eventually.
I mean, I love that concept of don't let marketing influence you. And that works for people like me, you, and our friends and our circle and our communities. But people outside of that, people who aren't geeks like us, to them, that marketing is all they're looking for. They're like, man, you know, this Noah guy I met one time, he was talking about security and stuff. And it really does. I do really see an issue here now. And then they see the commercial for Apple going, hey, by the way, we're the most secure and trusted devices out here. Okay, that's where I'll go. You know, that's kind of, it is shaping the population.
Right. But I mean, at the same time, I see that marketing ad come out, and then immediately following that, I see, oh, and so-and-so's iPhone was confiscated, and eventually they were able to break in and got XYZ. I don't know. I think to a certain degree, it comes down to, first of all, you can't lead a horse. You can lead a horse to water. You can't force it to drink, right? And so at the end of the day, every individual is going to make their own mind up at what platform they want to trust and be there. But if that were true, if the Linux desktop were dying, and really what you're saying is end user consumption of Linux devices, right? That's really what we're saying by the Linux desktop, because it means a lot of different things these days. That if that were true, then I would suspect that we wouldn't see such a culmination effort on things like Linux Mobile. You wouldn't see Postmarket OS and Manjaro ARM and all of those things, which, by the way, are based on the Linux desktop. Then they just took their code and ported it into a smaller device and made it run on ARM platforms because people want smaller devices they can carry in their pocket. So when we attach these arbitrary labels, we start to remove nuance and we start to remove critical thinking. And we no longer evaluate things based on values. What are people searching for in a solution? Instead, we try to dumb everything down and go, well, they picked the iPhone and not the Linux laptop. So clearly the metrics say that the iPhone is winning and the Linux desktop is not. That's a very one-sided, that's a very narrow way of interpreting information and looking at available information. And I don't think it paints a full picture of what people want out of their technology. I think it paints a picture of what choices people have today. It paints a picture of what their appreciation is and understanding of what their available options are, and then how they're making choices based on that today. That's what I think it paints.
All right. So interesting points. Michael, what are your thoughts on this? Is the desktop dying?
Definitely not. I think that there's different aspects of this topic, and I think that Noah was right about how it's a much broader concept and it's not just a narrow view, especially considering a lot of people who buy phones are also getting laptops, and it's not just the metric of just they're going for a phone. I mean, there are some people who do just use a phone or just use a tablet, and that kind of thing is true, but they would only use a laptop in the past because they had to, not because they would choose it anyway. So in the sense of like, there's different cultures of computing as well.
We have mass shortages of hardware for a reason. People want hardware. There's not just mass shortages of phones. There's mass shortages of laptops and desktop components and everything. So yeah.
And it's more of like the space of what people want. People think that the desktop is dying because of, insert any variable, but you can kind of flip around those variables and say that those are reasons why it's not dying. Like, for example, with, we talk about how, gaming is a factor. Like prior to, 10 years ago, gaming was unheard of in Linux. We had like 12 games, something like that. Or, I mean, not exactly 12, but it is a very small number. And now we have thousands of games available because of the effort Valve put into Linux and, standing behind Linux as a platform. And also you can take the same stuff there and saying like how much we have grown in terms of hardware support thanks to the efforts in gaming and thanks to the things.
Not that you're going to say thanks to me, but okay.
Sure, buddy. And thanks to the Proton effort and stuff like that, and the compatibility with the Wine platform, and all these things made it so that more and more attention is going to the Linux platform. And like what Jill was talking about, how there's no more hardware interest in these massive corporations bringing Linux to the desktop on their laptops and things like that. So like, for example, last year, Fedora was launched with Lenovo products and stuff like that, which was the first, I think Lenovo's pushing towards that kind of thing. And with we have Dell and HP and also putting on that, we have more and more people putting into it. And also, I think that the Linux desktop is the best experience it ever has been. So when people switch to Linux, it's a lot easier than it was 10 years ago. I mean,
there is an extreme lack. All of what you're saying is completely true. And one of the reasons why the desktop certainly can't go away yet is, number one, people having access to high-speed internet, which is a problem all across the world. And number two is, of course, things like high-end computing, which isn't your everyday user. So most people could switch away, but high-end computing is needed for a large portion of users, whether they're doing video rendering, creation, animations, or gaming. And all of these gaming cloud services came from a bunch of big names out recently. You had NVIDIA involved in it, you had Google involved in it, and they've all flopped. Why? Lag issues, not having licensing issues, performance problems. There's just been a whole plethora of reasons why they've all failed, even with people with high-speed internet, high-end computers on the other side of it, all of these things. So I don't think the technology's there yet, but Noah's definitely right that things are going mobile. And the one area that Linux lacks heavily, and the one thing I would say gives some credence, is we don't really have any good mobile options right now.
But here's the thing. Somebody wrote into my show a few weeks ago and asked and said, I'm really frustrated with where we're at with mobile. Can you help me or shed some light or give me some encouragement? And what I would tell you is, with the advent of the Pine phone, it has flipped the Linux mobile ecosystem on its head. There was a time, I remember when Canonical first announced that they were going to do Ubuntu Touch, and I was like, wow, actual Linux on a phone. This will be interesting. And myself and many other people were skeptical that this could happen. Google, iOS, those are your pillars. And now there's going to be a third comer. Come on, really? You think you're going to do that? And if that was true 5, 6 years ago, it's definitely true today, right? And at the same time, I have more confidence in Linux Mobile today than I did back then, because when the Pine phone came out, all of a sudden, all of these people went around and went, oh, we could build a Linux desktop on a little phone. Yeah, we can do that. We can scale it, just Kernel and put the little things there. Oh, look at that. I threw it together, right? And in just a couple of months, you have things like Manjaro ARM, you have Sailfish OS, you have Postmarket OS, you have the Ubi ports, which is the continuation of Ubuntu Touch. All of these operating systems have just sprung up. And a big reason for that is, for the first time in human history, you can go purchase a device that you have out of the box administrative access to, where you don't have to spend the first like three weeks with your brand new $800 phone going, gee, I plug this in, ADB, oh my gosh. I was trying to install an alternative ROM. In an unrelated note, I've just bricked my $800 phone. None of that.
I have no warranty, blah, blah, blah.
Right, exactly. All of those things prevented people from even beginning to try stuff on their phone, let alone actually making any real progress. And so within a year or two of having actual hardware available for people to hack on, we have usable mobile operating systems. They're not great. They're certainly not a daily driver. They're no replacement for your Android or iOS device, and they're nowhere close. And they don't claim to be. But what they are is a definitive representation of what a couple of guys just throwing some code together can get done in a few years when you have a suitable hardware platform. And now you have companies like Sony coming out with their open devices platform that say, hey, we're going to make really good devices that you can load alternative operating systems on. And the Pixel 3, weird as it is to say that a phone from Google, happens to be the only phone that Graphene OS can use their hardware security chip to get the most hardened version of a mobile operating system out there. And so they make a security hardened version of it.
I agree with everything you're saying. And I think, that's true, but we're still a decade behind there in the mobile world.
We are, but consider this, right? We're a decade behind in the user. And this is why I say it's really important to have a 30,000 foot view of where we're at. Yes, you're right. In the end user device that they hold in their hand and how they access those things, we're behind. But you know what? We're light years ahead. In fact, we're the dominant platform where all those services originate. So really what we're talking about is minimizing the gap between the little app that we publish that lets you access the cloud server from Android and having that replicated on this new one that is a Linux-based operating system, right? That's a much smaller gap to close and a much more understandable, conceivable, hey, we could achieve that, than it is trying to say, hey, we need to build an app store and we need to build an ecosystem like Google and Apple. Not really, because at the end of the day, all those are is a collection of other software projects that are already running on Linux servers on the back end.
Yeah. So, Jill, final words here on this. What are your thoughts? What are some things that you noticed in some of the arguments here about the Google thread? I think we've knocked a lot of these down. Any others you want to touch on?
I really think one of the big deals is that the high volume of sales from the likes of System 76 and Dell proves that the Linux desktop is not dead.
It's growing, right? These are new things.
It's growing. There's high demand. Yeah. They can't keep the computers in stock.
That's true.
So, with developers and content creators like Ryan and Michael was saying before, also with AI and people moving over from Windows IT to Linux IT, we're growing. Our desktop is growing, and in fact, it was just a few years ago that it was 1% of the ranking of operating systems, and now it's well over 2%, and that's actually huge. It's actually honestly bigger than that, but we can't track it all.
It's way bigger than that, but we don't know exactly. These are based on
with having a private and secure platform. You
Yeah.
can't track the metrics perfectly.
And even when there's telemetry that is valuable, that isn't violating any privacy security, there's still pushback against that. So it's even harder to kind of gauge exactly where it is. So it's probably much higher than what we think it is.
Yes.
But it's still, it's not going to be like a 60% or something like that, but it's going to be it's much bigger number. But also consider the difference between a 1% and a 2% in the world of computing. That is millions of people and millions of devices. So it might seem like a small number, but it is a huge number because overall the actual the metrics of it all. But I agree completely that the desktop is growing. It's better than it's ever been. I think that there's so many ways that a Pipewire is awesome. Like being able to make prosumer audio stuff, the pro work of audio on the desktop in a much easier way is a game changer, and it's going to be even bigger when the other distros jump in. And I think that's not a thing that the servers want. That's not a server-based, cloud-based thing that matters at all. That's a desktop-oriented thing. Maybe it's an enterprise desktop, maybe it's a whatever, but it's still a desktop-specific thing. They're not making Pipewire for servers because you're not logging into the servers to do your audio synthesizers and whatnot. That's not a thing that's going to happen. So I do think that it's growing in a lot of ways, and I do think that there are some issues to talk about in terms of like the mobile aspects and that kind of thing. But overall, I think we're growing so huge, and like Noah was talking about with like the Pine phone, it's not even been 2 years. It's been like I think a year and a half since we got the first Pine phone out, and it's already been such a huge game changer in that space. And there's already been iterations of the Pine phone for it getting better. Like there's so many cool things.
I'm waiting for that Pine phone Pro.
Yeah, I can't wait for the Pine phone Pro. That's going to be amazing. But I also want to talk about like the way that there's certain things that are happening with like the flat packs and the snaps and the app images of the world. These things are actually increasing the amount of attention to Linux as a desktop, and increasing the ability for people to pick a distro and not really have to worry about which distro it is, because they can just have the support for the apps that they want thanks to these formats. And with Red Hat announcing last year, I don't remember what month it was, but last year they announced the Red Hat runtime for Flatpaks, which to me is a huge thing. And now it's a very complicated thing, but as like an overview, 1,000-foot overview that we're talking about, like this is such a huge potential because it means that people can make Flatpaks using this runtime and have support with the Red Hat brand attached to it and 10 years of that support. So let's say, for example, there are some companies that make software just for Red Hat or, inherently just for CentOS. And that's like, DaVinci Resolve. They only do that, but this way they could do that work on this runtime and it be available to everyone. There's a ton of potential there. And I think that that's a very important thing that's not talked about much. And I think there's a lot of stuff like that, while it's, back-end stuff that doesn't seem like it's, to the desktop developers. I think that Flatpaks themselves are specifically for desktop, and the work done for the Red Hat runtime and done for the FlatHub and all of these things.
So the desktop environment for Linux or Linux desktop is not dead. Then that's what
not even close. I think that it's better than it ever has been, and I think that it has the path to grow even better. And I think that most of the arguments I've heard about this, there are a couple that are valid in saying like there are
things we should think about,
things that we should consider that do have some impact. But there's a lot of stuff that is just a bit of FUD,
hyperbole.
Yeah. And we can't forget the little Raspberry Pi that is the top selling computer in the world running a Linux desktop.
That's true. And it's the one Linux computer you can go into any store, Best Buys, Targets, everything, and pick one up now. I can't believe it. I see it everywhere. It makes me so happy.
$5 starting at $5.
Yeah, it's very cool. All right. So I hope this helps. If you've seen this argument, if this has made you worried about the future of Linux at any point, rest assured that while there are opportunities for growth, while there are things that we can tackle later on, that Linux desktop, as far as any of us can see anyways, is here to stay, and it's just getting better.
And also something that's also getting better all the time, that is Bitwarden. Thanks to Bitwarden for sponsoring this episode of Destination Linux. So you can go get your account at bitwarden.com/DLN and get an awesome password manager that just keeps getting better. It has so many great tools available to you, so you can get a secured vault to store your passwords in and automatically generate those passwords with a generator. You can also automatically fill in passwords with for login forms and that sort of stuff with Bitwarden. It does it all this stuff for you, and it does it across all different types of desktops or different types of devices, whether you use a web browser or you have mobile apps or desktop application needs, or even on the command line, you can do that as well. And Bitwarden seals and encrypts your data with end-to-end encryption before it ever leaves those devices. So you're the only person who has access to that data. You can be, rest assured that data is secured and safe because all that is done locally on your devices. So when it goes to their servers, it's in this, gibberish nonsense of encrypted data, and that it's only one. You're the only one who has the key to be able to get that data back, which is another factor of why Bitwarden is awesome. But But in addition to all of this, Bitwarden is also 100% open source software. So they understand the value of open source. They understand the philosophy behind it, and they are completely embracing it. And that's what makes Bitwarden just even more awesome than already having great software. So go to bitwarden.com/DLN to get started. And did I mention you can get started for free? You can, but I think you also want to check out their premium account. But you can get a 1 gigabyte of encrypted file storage, 2-step login with YubiKey, U2F, Duo, Vault Health Reports, Bitwarden Authenticator for temporary one-time passwords, party customer service, and so much more. And you get all this.
Wait, Michael, wait. That's got to be $25 a month, right?
Oh, not $25 a month. I mean, it's worth $25. I would pay $25 a month, but it's not that. It's less than $1 per month. You can actually get $10 per year will get you a Bitwarden account, and you can actually have it for your personal individual account. You can get organizational accounts, business accounts. There's so much great things. And having the business thing, I actually helped someone set up a business account where they could share their passwords between the different people in the company, and that making it so much easier. And it's so affordable for all of that. And also people, like, you can get a family account. So if you want to share it with your wife or your husband, or you want to share it with your kids and that kind of thing, you can actually, it makes it so much easier to have this sort of stuff. Bitwarden is just awesome. And it helps you get peace of mind knowing that your passwords and other sensitive data is safe. And especially you want to check out that premium account because you can basically show your appreciation for a company that truly understands open source and also appreciates the Destination Linux podcast by sponsoring. So go to bitwarden.com/DLN to get started. And thanks again to Bitwarden for sponsoring Destination Linux.
And speaking of the Linux desktop not dying, and a major project that is contributing, Google is in the news this week for contracting Miguel Ojeda to start implementing Rust into the Linux kernel. Yay!
That's huge, right? This is pretty big.
This is really big. We already have some Rust window managers out there, including the left window manager, tiling window manager. That works really well. I enjoy using that one. So, but what's cool is Miguel Ojeda, who is doing this, has such an impressive resume, which includes work involved in programming CERN's Large Hadron Collider software for high performance computing computers.
Wow.
And he sees this as an opportunity to implement more secure code with Rust and getting more programmers involved in development of the kernel.
This is the biggest deal, I think, out of all of this, right? Because there's this fear of what happens when Hartman or Torvalds all go away at some point.
Yes.
And who's going to take over the C language? And there's plenty of people out there who still learn C and know C, but not in masses, right? There's not a huge group of people coming out of school learning that language. But Rust is a very popular language right now that continues to grow. And I think what's interesting about Rust is that it was created by another company I really like, Mozilla. In addition, so you've got Mozilla in there, but the idea of bringing more people, getting more people involved to contribute to this code is, to me, the most exciting part about this. And the fact that Google's kind of financing this, well, like you said, Jill, it kind of puts to rest that rumor that the Linux desktop's dead, doesn't it?
Yes. Absolutely. And what's really cool is Google said they're interested in increasing the security of Linux through moves like this for Android and Chrome OS. So, they want that Linux kernel to be very, very secure, even if they use it only on the back end.
But see, if they were completely sold on going to Fuchsia, they wouldn't be worrying about this right now, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
They would be like, hey, we're going to be removing this Linux thing anyways. We'll patch what we have left, and we're going to focus all of our attention on Fuchsia. But I mean, Google is known for killing projects off, every 3-4 months, 80 versions of it. I mean, who says Fuchsia even goes anywhere past the hub that they have there? I think a lot of people speculate and create headlines and rumors with this stuff. And I'm not saying Google doesn't go that direction. They're probably putting their eggs in multiple baskets as a company the size of Google needs to do. But you can see one of those baskets they're investing heavily in is still Linux.
Is Linux, yes. Yeah, this is great news because, many people had approached Linus with implementing Rust into the kernel, and he was for the idea because it's a modern coding system that a lot of people love, and it's actually fairly easy to code in. I've done a little bit of Rust myself.
I would say, of course you have, Jill, but of course you have. But as far as learning Rust, Jill, when you say you messed with it a little bit, you also play in Python as well. Obviously,
Yes.
two different tools and use cases, but what's the learning curve difference for you in, starting to learn Rust versus starting to learn Python? I was curious. I wanted to ask people
Yeah.
who've written in Rust, is this a language that's just far easier to pick up? Because I haven't investigated it myself.
Yeah, I mean, I actually did a beginning class in Rust for the Linux Chicks of Los Angeles, and we'd also done Python as well, and it was just as easy for the students to learn it.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
and
pretty telling, right?
yeah, and well, the beauty of it also is that it bare metal as well as up higher in the software development. So it has a nice in between
Yeah.
as far as code goes.
Yeah, Rust is a nice thing because it's complicated to the point where it can do powerful things, but it's
Yeah.
not so complicated that it becomes like a barrier to entry. But at the same time, it also is focused on trying to make it reasonably simple to get started with Rust, but also be able to port your knowledge of another language to Rust. So it's a really wonderfully designed language. And when Mozilla talked about it when they first started it, I think they were making it for Servo, and then they started just like kind of branching it out to its own thing. And it's kind of interesting because Rust became it split away from Mozilla because they were like, this is so important, we need to make a foundation for it. So they created the Rust Foundation, and a lot of companies are jumping onto it and making it a much more impactful type of language. And also there's been people who have been talking about putting the Rust language inside of the kernel for quite a while because of like just how much people are a fan of this language, because it is powerful, but also reasonably it's a reasonable language to get started with. Like a lot of people talk about how Python is a super easy language to get started into programming, and I think that is true. Also, it is, but Rust is not as easy as Python, but it's reasonably easy in comparison to other
Python's
languages.
very
Yeah,
advanced. I like what you said earlier, that the barrier to learning Python's really low. You can
Yes.
get really advanced in
Yeah.
Python.
Yes.
And the barrier to Rust being low, you can get really advanced into Rust, but you don't lose people the first 3 days of class where they go, I'm never going to learn this thing, it's too complex. And I think that's the difference, is that you have that ability to show some actual progression with these languages like Rust and Python before you get into the advanced stuff, where you don't lose basically your interest in it. And I love that Linus was open to this, right? Because
Yes.
what if he was just like, no, it started in C, it's going to stay in C. How many projects are like that? And he's not that way. He's like, no, if we want, let's bring more people in, let's get more people contributing, and the popularity's there in Rust. So let's start doing some stuff in Rust here.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of potential, and it's really cool to see Google, investing in making that sort of thing happen. Because if they didn't think that the Linux kernel was going to be around for very long, they wouldn't have, decided to let's help bring this new language into the kernel even more so, because there's already people who have been working on it for a few months, putting that work in, and having Google jump in to help fund that work.
Google constantly messes with my brain. One
Yeah,
side
exactly.
of my brain's like, Google bad, stay away. The other side of my
Yeah.
brain's like, thank you, Google, for doing this really cool thing. Like, it's really confusing sometimes to talk about this company. It stinks because they
Yeah.
could be cooler. They could be more trend setting, right? From an overall popularity standpoint, I'm talking here, than Apple ever was, especially when you think about when Google first entered the scene. I mean, companies were doing studies on their work culture and how they were doing things so differently than other corporations. And they have this incredible minds working there, and this ability to really change the foundations of how we look at technology in the future. And then they do these other things that just mess it all up. And if they would just focus on stuff like this, where
Yeah,
people would be
progress.
fans of them, companies like Apple would have no chance to even compete against them, because they're open, right? Everybody
Yeah.
can get involved and be cool. If they would just leave my personal info alone, we would be good, Google. We could be on good terms.
Why can't we be friends, Google? Why do you do this?
Help me be friends with you again, okay? Let me love you. Let me love you.
Let me love you.
All right, so this is cool. I have another cool thing for you all. It's in the gaming section this week. Have you ever wanted? Are you familiar with R-Type, Jill? You remember R-Type?
Yes.
Okay, and Michael, R-Type. I'm not going to ask
Oh,
you
yeah.
because it's not a person shooting people, so I don't think you probably know R-Type. But it's
Run and
spaceships.
gun.
It's spaceships, mass battles, and Nintendo and thing. R-Type was a really popular game out there. But the problem was spaceships. Some people don't want to be a spaceship. They don't want that to be their main character. They want to be a goose. And that's why the game Mighty Goose is featured this week in the gaming section, because it's just like R-Type, where you have tons of enemies on the screen. You have all kinds of fireballs and shots and lasers and the things attacking you in the scroller, but you're a goose.
Naturally.
And you have to kill him off. This has 234 very positive reviews for those who think this is just silly nonsense. Well, it is silly nonsense, but it's kind of fun, silly nonsense here. The game describes itself like this. It's a fast-paced run and gun shooter starring a bounty hunter goose. Use epic weapons, devastating war machines to battle against screen-filling bosses and hordes of enemies. If you're into this genre of game, which a lot of us growing up in the gaming world were, this looks like a fun take on that, Jill. Have you ever played Mighty Goose?
No, I haven't, but the trailer looks pretty impressive.
Ridiculous, right? In the best way possible, ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely wanna play this. And one of the other cool things is that the musician is named Dominic Ninmark. He does one of my other favorite synth rock soundtracks on Blazing Chrome, which is kind of a B-rated run and gun.
Nice.
It's hilarious. And he also did the soundtrack for Moonrider and Gravity Circuit. And Gravity Circuit is also available on Linux.
Very cool. Yeah, this is available on Linux, as you said. It's that ridiculous fun, Michael, like the movie I invited you to watch yesterday, Attack of the Killer Donuts, in which you denied coming over to watch Attack of the Killer Donuts. And yes, this is a real movie. And yes, I really invited Michael over, but he didn't want to come watch it. It's that kind of ridiculous fun that you're missing out on.
Yeah. Oh, no. I'm going to not be able to watch the Attack of the Killer Donuts. But this Mighty Goose thing looks great. It looks like a fun game, like in the vein of like I wasn't familiar with R-Type, but when I looked it up, and it was very similar to like Contra or like a Mega Man style and
Mega
that kind
Man.
of. So I think that is a fantastic idea in terms of like I just love that style of game and that kind of platformer. So I am definitely very interested in this Mighty Goose, partly because I like that kind of game and also because of its ridiculousness.
Yeah, it's fun because it's doing a tongue-in-cheek take on the genre, which is a really a lot of fun, and I love those kind of games. And it was interesting because Paint It Black on a YouTube chat says, sounds like Earthworm Jim. Yeah, it looks like it has some elements of Earthworm Jim, at least as far as the story goes.
Well, very cool. You can go check out Mighty Goose right now because it plays on Linux.
Yeah.
And this week's software spotlight is also on Linux, but you know how that works. So we're going to talk about Deskreen. I think it's Deskreen. It's a desktop app that allows you to turn any device that has a web browser into a secondary screen for your computer over Wi-Fi. So this is really cool. Basically, Deskreen can be used to mirror an entire computer display onto another screen that has a web browser. Also, you can basically mirror an individual application to if you want to, and that's so that'd be for like presentation purposes and that sort of thing. And but the best feature is, like I said, you can use any device as a secondary screen as like an extended desktop method. And this is a very cool thing. For example, if you have a extra tablet that you have when you travel, you could use that to set it up with your laptop to be a secondary monitor with that while you're traveling. And it's a really cool concept. So if you want to check it out, Deskreen.com, and we'll have a link. It's spelling especially in the show notes.
We talk a lot about encrypting your data and making sure it's secure and private by default. So maybe you've asked yourself from time to time, well, how exactly do I go about encrypting my data? Well, we have a simple tip for you this week that will help you do just that. Did you know that you can encrypt files using GPG? And this is a simple software package that is available almost certainly in your distro's repository. And so once you've installed GPT, or if it's installed by default, you can encrypt a file just by using the command gpg space tac-c and then the file name. Now this will prompt you for a password, or if you have a key file, you'll be able to set that up in your GPG configuration. But in any event, that will encrypt your file. If you'd like to then decrypt the file, you can use gpg tac-d and then the file name to decrypt the file. GPG has more advanced functions that you can try out. If you'd like to learn more, we invite you to grep the man page of GPG by typing man GPG in the terminal. Stay tuned for future tips and tricks. And if you're just getting started with Linux, we invite you to go back and watch previous episodes where we've covered everything from Docker to all the things you need to know about Linux.
And also, of course, you can go to destinationlinux.org/picks to see every single pick we have ever done, whether it's a software spotlight or a tip of the week. It's all right there for your heart's content to consume, and every which way. It's at destinationlinux.org/picks.
So a huge thank you to each and every one of you for watching or listening. However you do it, we love your faces. And if you want more DL, you can become a patron like all of these folks. You can't see them. They're behind the scenes in our super secret virtual stadium. I think it's like 400,000 square foot now. It's massive. They have so much room for activities, so much room to mess with Linux back here, becoming a patron. But you also get unedited versions of the show, VIP access to events, live recordings of Destination Linux every Sunday with your special virtual seats that nobody can see you in, and come and chat with us directly. Plus, you get the patron only after show that you get to hang out with as well. It's pretty awesome stuff. Go to Patreon or Sponsus to sign up.
We have LAN parties in the Skybox. Sorry.
There you go. Yeah, Skybox.
We do.
In addition, every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern, we're now live at dlnlive.com. The best part is everyone is invited to watch the recording of Destination Linux each and every week. And we can't wait to see you in the chat.
And also go right now to dlnstore.com where you can pick up some swag like t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, stickers, backpacks, aprons, all sorts of stuff, including the Sudo shirt, a Sudo Show shirt that you can check out. And that is available at dlnstore.com with all sorts of other great goodies there to check out.
And we have so many amazing shows here on the Destination Linux Network. We have the Sudo Show, the Ask Noah Show, This Week in Linux, the DOS Geek Channel, and this time I did it wrong.
It happens.
Dabby.
It happens. It happens. We're all taking turns forgetting how to dab.
Yeah. DLN Extend, Hardware Addicts, GameSphere, and get your Fedora hat on with our latest show, the Fedora Podcast. So go to destinationlinux.network and subscribe to all these wonderful shows to keep those penguins marching in the full Monty of Linux and open source awesome sauce.
Everyone have a great week. And remember, the journey itself is just as important as the destination. We'll see you
Happy
next
Father's Day.
Yeah, happy Father's Day.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, patrons, turn on your cameras, turn on your mics. Come hang out with us. Come talk to us. Talk to us about the desktop, Linux desktop, why it's live and thriving.